Devil Venerable also wants to know. Chapter 15, Severing Blood and Engraving Soul. After regaining awareness with the help of the burning sky drum, Wenren he engaged the 21 experts in a desperate battle to the death. He didn't know how many of them he had managed to kill and how many had survived. Wenren he had originally planned to unleash all of his power and fight to his limits to test how strong he had become. He had wanted to disregard everything else, but the drum beats brought him back to his senses at the last moment. Yin Hanjiang had not risked his life using void boundary power to activate the burning sky drum in order to see Wenren he die in battle. He had promised Yin Hanjiang before the battle that he would survive. Wenren he would never go back on his word. At the very end, he held back a part of his power in order to defend himself, and in doing so, he managed to preserve his life long enough to be saved by Yin Hanjiang. With his last breath, he let Yin Hanjiang know that he was still alive, before losing consciousness. His injuries were too severe, and while drifting in and out of consciousness, he could hear Yin Hanjiang calling him, but his eyelids felt heavy and he couldn't open them. In the original plot, Wenren he had lain unconscious for some time, and upon waking up, he saw Bailey Qing Miao busy working before him. He saw a single ray of the rising sun land on Bailey Qing Miao's body. Her expression was warm but resolute, with a beautiful and pure wish to save others. Seeing her bathed in that ray of sun, or perhaps divine light, the heart of the demonic sect leader was moved. At the time, Wenren he was not yet aware that his love tribulation had arrived, and only coldly told this righteous junior disciple that he could grant her one favor. Bailey Qing Miao stared blankly for a moment, then she shook her head and said, "I just need you to live." Wenren he had sustained heavy internal injuries and also wasn't willing to return to Shangqing sect with Bailey Qing Miao for treatment. With that, Bailey Qing Miao could only use the communication talisman that her master Qingrong gave her to report back that she would be gone for a while. Before the war, Shangqing sect had given each of the support disciples a jade slip and rushed them through some medical knowledge and the locations of some magic herbs. During the 3 months Yin Hanjiang had been cultivating, Bailey Qing Miao and her fellow disciples were busy memorizing the jade slips and practicing healing spells. She realized that Wenren he's injuries were too severe and that the golden core in his dantian was unstable, with his qi almost completely drained. In order to save his life, Bailey Qing Miao decided to take him to the 9 Cauldron Mountains, the location of the 9 Yang soul reviving flesh mushroom, which could bring back the dead and regrow flesh from bones, as recorded in her jade slip. Wenren he watched her coldly for the entire journey as she climbed the mountain carrying him and did battle with the beasts guarding the mushroom. After she obtained the mushroom, she boiled it into broth and didn't take even a spoonful for herself, feeding it all to Wenren he. In the book, after Wenren he was healed, he saw Bailey Qing Miao's overjoyed expression and his heart finally fell for her. He didn't reveal his identity. He just left a token and told her she could use it to call him if she met with trouble. No matter what it was, Wenren he would do anything to help her. Bailey Qing Miao had never thought of receiving something in return from Wenren he and was only happy that she was able to save one more life. After bidding Wenren he farewell, Bailey Qing Miao returned to her sect, and when she saw that He Wenzhou had lost his nascent soul, her heart froze in an instant. The gravely injured and despondent He Wenzhou said to Bailey Qing Miao, "Shimei, when I was injured, all I wanted to do was see you one last time, but where have you been?" Bailey Qing Miao was sobbing so hard that she couldn't speak. She had obtained the flesh mushroom but used it on a stranger instead of her Shikshan. She asked her elders for a way to save He Wenzhou, and set out alone toward the Golden Coast Cliffs. Along the way, she came across Wenren he, who had been watching her all that time, and then accompanied her on her journey. This time, the one who saved Wenren he was Yin Hanjiang, who didn't know where the flesh mushroom grew. The Venerable One was unconscious, so all he could do was bring him to the small mountain valley where he had begun cultivating. This was the small sect that Wenren he had once led and where he brought Yin Hanjiang after he picked him up. After Wenren he unified the demonic sects, he secretly gave this place to Yin Hanjiang and set up wards around it. It belonged to Yin Hanjiang alone and no one else knew of it. While Wenren he was in battle, Yin Hanjiang had noticed how Hall Master Ruan had dropped his title. The demonic sects were rife with ambitious individuals. From the protectors and hall masters to the common cultivators, each and every one would kick one while they were down. If Yin Hanjiang brought a heavily injured Wenren he back to Xianyuan sect, Xu Yanyan would probably be the first in line to kill him. When the Venerable One was at his full power, the Xianyuan sect all stood behind him, but when he was weak, Xianyuan sect was as a den of cannibals. Since Yin Hanjiang didn't dare to bring Wenren he to Xianyuan sect, he only had two options. First, the small border town where he had grown up, and second, the place that the Venerable One had taken him to train when he was young. Holding Wenren he dove through the waterfall he once cultivated in front of and went into the small cave behind it. It was rich in spiritual energy and well suited for recovery. The Venerable One was seriously injured. Yin Hanjiang seated him cross-legged and took out all the medicine in his storage belt, picking out some milder ones that could replenish spiritual essence and shoving them in Wenren he's mouth. Wenren he had no spiritual energy left and was unable to swallow the pills. Yin Hanjiang hesitated for several moments, then after saying, "Excuse my rudeness," he pried open Wenren he's mouth. With an inch of distance between them, he exhaled a mouthful of spiritual energy into Wenren he's mouth. He acted with extreme care and deliberately avoided touching the Venerable One's pale lips with his own. After Wenren he had taken the medicine, Yin Hanjiang also poured the remaining dregs of his spiritual essence into him and cycled it through his body once. After feeling his Venerable One's chi begin circulating on its own and absorbing the medicine, he breathed a sigh of relief. After relaxing, Yin Hanjiang found himself wobbling on his feet. He coughed up a mouthful of blood and collapsed at Wenren he's feet. The old sect master of Xianyuan sect had been at the peak of Mahayana, but while using the burning sky drum, he had been trapped by its illusions and suffered chi deviation. Yin Hanjiang was barely in void boundary stage. After forcibly activating the burning sky drum and suffering the backlash of its violent energy, his internal organs had been heavily damaged. With his single-minded desire to save Wenren he hadn't even noticed his own state or felt the pain. Only after he revived Wenren did Yin Hanjiang notice that he was on his last legs. Waking up after absorbing the medicine, Wenren found himself in a dark and damp cave, with a black-clothed man lying at his feet, face pressed against the cold stone. Turning him over, he found green lichen smeared on his face, making him look like the victim of some horror from a folk ghost story. When Wenren tried to channel energy, pain shot through his dantian like it was tearing apart. He took off his black robe and saw that his body was covered with wounds from swords, knives, whips, staves, seemingly every kind of wound that could be made by 18 different types of magic weapons. His physical injuries weren't a big deal, but what was more important was that the golden core in his dantian was unstable and he had drained his spiritual chi while using the 7-killing halberd. Without the flesh mushroom, he might not recover even after recuperating for 100 years. He struggled to sit up and lift Yin Hanjiang in his arms. He felt that Yin Hanjiang's clothes were damp. He opened his robe and saw that his thin body looked like it'd been slashed up by a blade before being stitched up by thin thread. It was hard to find an undamaged patch of skin on him. Wenren was aghast at the sight of his split-open flesh. He placed a hand on Yin Hanjiang's chest, trying to heal him, but he couldn't call up a single wisp of spiritual energy. Powerless, he could only sit down next to Yin Hanjiang and let out a despairing laugh. In the 300 years since he'd entered the path of cultivation, he had never been in such a pathetic state before. He had no way to heal himself. In the book, Bailey Qingmiao had found the flesh mushroom to save him, but in order to change the plot, Wenren had given up on the easy way out and picked a painful and arduous path for himself. "Protector Yin," Wenren said quietly. "The most difficult time in this Venerable One's life was 300 years ago when I dug through that mass grave to find my family. There were 273 corpses belonging to his clansmen there, All beheaded. Criminals would not get a burial, and after the execution, the heads would be burned and bodies thrown into a mass grave. 7 days had already passed by the time Wenren he made it back to the capital, and the bodies had started to decompose. There was no way to tell anyone apart. He dug through the corpse pile day and night, dragging out 296 headless corpses. The smallest was just 3 months old. Aside from the few with unique statures, Wenren he had no way of telling apart the remaining 237 corpses. The bodies of other criminals were mixed in, so Wenren he didn't even know which were his relatives. The entire clan had been loyal to the end, yet they were killed and their corpses desecrated. The then 16 years old Wenren he knelt before 296 headless corpses, crying and howling, unable to vent his hatred. The Wuxiang Temple abbot's power had been great and led Wenren he to recall memories that he had forgotten 300 years ago. He glanced over at Yin Hanjiang's closed eyes, and his gaze held a weak smile. "Protector Yin, when this venerable one walked past that pile of corpses and saw a hand grab onto me, do you know how happy I was? 100 years ago, Wenren he thought he'd already forgotten the past when that tiny hand reached out for the hem of his robes. He picked that child up out of the corpse pile and felt his neck to check that he wasn't a beheaded corpse. He pressed an ear against the child's chest, and that weak heartbeat was like music to his ears. At that moment, the cold and heartless Wenren he held little Yin Hanjiang in his arms, not noticing the tears that slid from his eyes. It was like he was finally free of the powerlessness he had felt when he was just 16. He had finally managed to save someone. Wenren he held Yin Hanjiang's wrist. The child he had saved back then was going to die soon. This silly child was already heavily injured but had given the last of his spiritual chi to Wenren he, which was basically throwing away his last lease on life. Yin Hanjiang, if this venerable one can save you once, he can save you twice. If this venerable one doesn't allow you to die, then you can't die. Wenren he looked at the demonic sword at Yin Hanjiang's side and his expression darkened. Yin Hanjiang never put his sword away in a storage item, stubbornly holding it like a sentinel. Yet this sword had a will of its own. After becoming a cultivator, Wenren he had stolen many techniques from other demonic sects. There had been one which was the hardest to use of all but was perfect for this moment. Your name is Qing, Wenren he said to the sword. Back when he handed the sword to Yin Hanjiang, he never told him its name. Calling the name would call awake the demonic sword's consciousness. Upon hearing its own name, Qing trembled lightly and left its sheath, hovering before Wenren he. Many sinister patterns appeared on the surface of its blade, an appearance that Yin Hanjiang had never seen. Looking at the sword, Wenren he recited a spell and the same patterns appeared on his body. The 7-killing halberd sensed what its master was doing and hummed plaintively. Wenren he raised a hand and told it, "Don't make a fuss." The halberd reluctantly trembled a few times but eventually heeded Wenren he's command and quieted down. Qing transformed into a hail of blood swords and with Wenren he's spell, stabbed deep into the patterns on his body, pinning him to the cave wall. Blood flowed down the stone, dripping onto Yin Hanjiang's face. Yin Hanjiang's eyelashes twitched painfully a few times but in the end, he didn't manage to wake up to see the Lord whom he was determined to protect being stabbed with the Qing blade and went down a path few survived. With thousands of swords in his body, Wenren he never stopped reciting. He slowly raised a hand and drew an array in midair with difficulty, matching the patterns on his body. It was the lifeblood soul locking array. After the array was completed, the lines drawn in crimson light melded into Wenren he's soul. Using the body to sever the blood, and using the blood to engrave the soul. When Qing left Wenren he's body, the instant the blades were pulled out, Wenren he's body burst into a cloud of bloody mist and dissipated within the cave. The 7-killing halberd let out a lamenting cry, and the 6th star of the southern dipper became gradually stained blood red. After several minutes, the blood mist gradually condensed, solidifying into a human figure. At the moment when his body and soul were dispersed, Wenren he endured the soul-splitting pain and through his resolution, managed to complete the blood-severing array. There was a lost technique in the cultivation world called the blood-severing art. The user had to carve the blood patterns on their flesh and voluntarily destroy their body and soul, then use the technique at the moment before death. It would fuse one's soul and body together, and from then on, if there was even a single drop of their blood that remained in the world, they would not die. Only one person had succeeded at the blood art in hundreds of thousands of years. It was not because the blood art was weak but because it had such a low chance of success. Without an absolute strong faith, it was impossible to bear the pain. After it was completed, one could recover from any injury no matter how severe it was, as long as they had sufficient spiritual energy. Wenren he put the black robe he had discarded with the pain of shattering his soul still lingering in his body. He frowned slightly and took a pill from his sleeve to swallow. After he had mostly recovered, he picked up Yin Hanjiang and sent the spiritual energy he had just restored into his meridians to force out the evil qi of the burning sky drum. For the next few months, Wenren he stayed in that small cave, absorbing spiritual energy to transfer to Yin Hanjiang, slowly restoring his damaged meridians. ******. In a distant location, Qiu Kongxiu was being carried on Bailey Qingmiao's back as she scaled a mountain. Qiu Kongxiu had said to Bailey Qingmiao, "Leave me be, don't take me back to your sect," before passing out. Her injuries were worse than that of Wenren he. The Buddha's light was terribly effective against ghost cultivators, and all the spirits she kept inside her body had been sent to the reincarnation cycle. She had no power left. Bailey Qingmiao assumed that the reason Qiu Kongxiu didn't want to return to her sect was that she didn't want to face her compatriots like this, injured so severely with no hope of recovery. She was determined to save her fellow cultivator. After reporting the situation with her message talisman, she tied the unconscious Qiu Kongxiu to her back and set off to Nine Cauldrons Mountain. It was said that Nine Cauldrons Mountain was a dwelling place of immortals. Even a Mahayana cultivator there would have their powers suppressed to the level of an ordinary person. Bailey Qingmiao was unable to fly and the cliffs were treacherous. She gripped a vine and climbed, gritting her teeth and holding back tears. She fell countless times on the way up, until her face and body were bruised and battered. She thought of giving up each time, but then she would remember how the person on her back was relying on her, and how she had been unable to save so many people in the Great Sect War. Then she gritted her teeth and encouraged herself to continue climbing. By the time she reached the top, she was about to collapse from exhaustion. The flesh mushroom was very well hidden and was impossible for ordinary people to find. After Bailey Qingmiao collapsed on the mountaintop, the mushroom took her for a corpse and was drawn by her divine essence. It rose up from the ground in order to eat her. A spiritual snake who protected the flesh mushroom slithered up and seeing that the mushroom had emerged, bit down on it and began wrestling with it. Bailey Qingmiao was roused by the noise and was overjoyed to see the flesh mushroom was right before her. With the dregs of her strength, she slew the snake and picked the flesh mushroom, then cooked it in a stew together with the snake. The aroma emanating from the flesh mushroom healed Bailey Qingmiao's wounds, and also allowed her to rise from the 5th level of core formation all the way to the final level. If she drank the broth, she could probably ascend on the spot. But she had no desire of it for herself. She let Qiu Kongxiu soak in the broth and watched as flesh regrew on her bones. "So you're a girl," she exclaimed happily. After all of Qiu Kongxiu's organs had been restored, Bailey Qingmiao fed every spoonful of the broth to her. Qiu Kongxiu's cultivation was instantly restored to Mahayana stage with her skin rosy, looking to be in perfect health. After waking up, Qiu Kongxiu saw a beautiful girl watching her with chin in one hand, expression filled with genuine joy. "Senior, you're healed at last." "Healed?" Qiu Kongxiu sat up and felt something was off with her body. She checked and saw that she had flesh now. A passage appeared in Qiu Kongxiu's mind. He saw Bailey Qingmiao's gaze filled with concern and that empty pot of broth which had all been given to him, and let out a sigh. Well, that's it, I guess. Chiu Kongxiu had no idea where these words came from, but she nodded in agreement. That's it? What is? Bailey Qingmiao said, blinking naively as she gazed toward Chiu Kongxiu. This hall master was a perfectly good ghost cultivator, willingly offering her own body to hungry ghosts in order to cultivate the Azura path and reach Mahayana stage. Chiu Kongxiu turned a threatening gaze toward Bailey Qingmiao. Bailey Qingmiao finally realized something was wrong. She backed away a few steps and fell to the ground, saying in a wavering voice, "Essie. Senior, what's wrong? What's wrong?" Chiu Kongxiu said, rising and approaching her. Her warm fingers clenched around Bailey Qingmiao's neck. "Do you know how hard it was to give up my body? You went and restored it with a few spoonfuls of soup. I'll kill you." End chapter. Devil Venerable also wants to know. Chapter 16, A Handful of Moonlight. Chiu Kongxiu's cultivation was suppressed by the seal on 9 Cauldrons Mountain, and her strength was currently roughly equal to that of Bailey Qingmiao's. Bailey Qingmiao forced back Chiu Kongxiu's hand and rolled out from underneath her to avoid her attack. When she was out of Chiu Kongxiu's range, she was about to say something when she suddenly blushed and she ran off. In a moment, she came back with a black robe in her arms, which she threw onto Chiu Kongxiu. She turned her face away and said, "Senior, please put something on." Huh. Chiu Kongxiu looked down at her body, which was as full and curvaceous as Shu Yanyan's, and didn't see anything wrong with it. She had gotten used to walking here and there as a skeleton, and long since forgotten what it was like to have a fleshy body. She was still fuming, but when Bailey Qingmiao backed off, she calmed down a bit and realized that her cultivation was being suppressed. Without spiritual energy, she stopped lashing out at her savior and coldly watched as Bailey Qingmiao blushed and ran off for clothes. Chiu Kongxiu slowly put on the robe. She squinted at Bailey Qingmiao and suddenly said, "You're Bailey Qingmiao." "I am." Bailey Qingmiao only turned fully around after seeing that Chiu Kongxiu was dressed properly. "Did Senior hear me muttering to myself while you were unconscious?" She hadn't heard it, but that passage, like an excerpt of text or someone reading a story by her ear, had told her that this girl was called Bailey Qingmiao. Speaking of which, that name Bailey Qingmiao seemed kind of familiar. Chiu Kongxiu was not like Shu Yanyan, who was constantly full of wicked ideas and acting behind people's backs. Hall Master Chiu never used her mouth if she could use her fists. Well, mouths were involved, but it was the mouths of her hungry ghosts. Though they were all similarly looking for opportunity to topple Wenren, Shu Yanyan was a proper right protector who helped the Devil Venerable in taking care of the sex business, keeping the smaller sects under Xianyuan sect firmly in line, while not forgetting to pick a few good-looking men from them to take home with her. She made every move to build Wenren's trust while waiting for the chance to steal the chi of the Mahayana cultivator. Too bad that Wenren was blind to beauties and even treated beautiful women like dirt. Every time Shu Yanyan showed any hint of intention to seduce, she would be thoroughly dealt with, and so she had settled down a lot after a few decades. On the other hand, Chiu Kongxiu also wanted to overthrow Wenren, but never concealed her hostility and even had an agreement to duel him every 10 years. As of present, she had been defeated 5 times. Shu Yanyan often said that Chiu Kongxiu's brain had been eaten by a hungry ghost, and that was pretty much the truth. A 1,000-year-old ghost lived in her skull and served as her hidden ace, which she didn't bring out lightly. Bailey Qingmiao. Chiu Kongxiu thought for a long time, and finally remembered that Shu Yanyan had mentioned her 11 years ago. She was the talented disciple whom Wenren favored, the one he wanted to steal from Shangqing sect and have her practice the path of indifference. "You're a core formation disciple of Shangqing sect?" Chiu Kongxiu asked. "I am." "Have we met before, Senior?" Core formation at 18 was certainly unprecedented, but Bailey Qingmiao was now 29 and still at core formation, so that was a bit less special. "Stick out your hand," Chiu Kongxiu commanded. She typically commanded hordes of ghosts and was used to ordering others around. Fortunately, Bailey Qingmiao was obedient and respected her as a Mahayana cultivator, so she stuck out her hand without hesitation. Qiu Kongxiu probed Bailey Qingmiao's meridians and her eyes widened. 9th level of core formation. The first level and the last level of core formation were completely different. The 9th level of core formation put Bailey Qingmiao on the threshold of nascent soul, only needing the manual and to pass her heart demon trial. Nascent soul before the age of 30 certainly was an exceptional talent. Even the cold-hearted Qiu Kongxiu felt some appreciation towards her. No wonder the devil Venerable wanted her as a disciple. If Bailey Qingmiao cultivated for 100 years, there was a possibility that she could surpass Wenren He. If I can't defeat Wenren He, maybe I can steal his disciple. Qiu Kongxiu scrutinized Bailey Qingmiao from head to toe. Bailey Qingmiao was intimidated and worried over whether the senior had a qi deviation. None of her behavior after waking up made sense. She tugged carefully on Qiu Kongxiu's robe and said, "Senior, I've already been away from the sect for too long. Now that you're healed, why don't we part ways here?" She didn't bring up a word of the other's debt to her. Just saving a life was enough for Bailey Qingmiao. "Hold on." Qiu Kongxiu grabbed Bailey Qingmiao's collar. "We're heading down together." Qiu Kongxiu was over 1,000 years old, but she still appeared as a young woman, with smooth pale skin and jet black hair, fine brows, and elegant eyes. They were tender yet heartless, making her a cold, distant beauty. Just that she was far too casual, lifting up her robes and showing off her bare thighs multiple times as she descended the mountain, acting like she was still a skeleton. Bailey Qingmiao felt like facepalming several times, but she didn't want to make Qiu Kongxiu uncomfortable, so she bore with it. At the bottom of the mountain, she finally spoke. "Senior, I have an extra set of robes. It's not the best in quality, but it can at least cover you up properly." She took out a light green gown, something that Wenren He had previously given to her. She had been determined to refuse at first, but Wenren He left her with no other choice but to take them. Qiu Kongxiu put it on. The clothes suited her very well. With her tall stature and slender waist, she seemed like a thin willow. Bailey Qingmiao looked at her for a moment, then took out an ordinary jade hairpin she had bought and helped pin up Qiu Kongxiu's hair. "Senior is so beautiful," she said with a small sigh. "What's the use of that?" Now that Qiu Kongxiu was off the mountain, her power was no longer being suppressed. She checked her condition and was so furious that she almost fainted from anger. Her cultivation realm really had been restored and her powers had grown, but the ghost qi she had spent so much effort cultivating was gone, and her body was filled with immortal qi instead. She had become a wandering immortal. Qiu Kongxiu tried summoning some nearby spirits, but not a single one heeded her call. She clenched her fists. How was she supposed to use this body to be for the leadership of Xianyuan sect with Wenren He? How was she supposed to keep Xu Yanyan in her place? Fortunately, Hall Master Qiu was a determined person. She was able to offer her body to the hungry ghosts and endure the pain to cultivate the Azura path, so now she could switch to cultivating as a wandering immortal. Bailey Qingmiao felt much more at ease after taking care of Qiu Kongxiu and bid farewell to her so she could return to her sect, only for Qiu Kongxiu to grab her hair. "Ow ow ow." Bailey Qingmiao clutched her hair and said lightly, "Senior, do you need anything? I recall that your righteous your Shangqing sect has a regulation that you can accept a wandering immortal as a guest, as long as they stay and help the Shangqing sect. According to how much they contribute, they can study techniques passed down from other wandering immortals in the sect library." Wandering immortals were exceptional existences in the cultivation world. They were more powerful than Mahayana cultivators, and the strongest amongst them could go toe-to-toe with the immortals from the upper realm. Any sect would highly welcome an unaffiliated wandering immortal. The sect's core techniques obviously couldn't be passed on to outsiders, but there was nothing wrong with letting them study some other techniques left behind by predecessors. The wandering immortal would also have to leave behind their own knowledge, so Qing sect had collected many secret techniques over the years. This was what Qing was after. The Qing sect had sustained heavy losses in the Great Sect War and needed the support of powerful experts. Qing's body was full of immortal qi after eating the flesh mushroom, and no one could tell she was a demonic cultivator, so she was confident that she would be accepted by Qing sect. She decided to become the respected elder of a righteous sect, and after gaining influence at Qing sect, fight her way back into Xianyuan sect and keep challenging Wenren He. Oh! Bailey Qingmiao said, dumbfounded. Why did the senior want to follow her back to her sect now? Let's go. I'll take you back to Qing sect. Qingxue was a resolute woman and always do as she said. Since Bailey Qingmiao flew too slow, she picked her up and flew toward Qing sect in a streak of light. By the time they arrived at Qing sect, Wenren He had finished purging the violent qi from Yin Hanjiang's body. Yin Hanjiang opened his eyes slowly and immediately caught sight of Wenren He. Venerable One. Yin Hanjiang instantly went to stand but was held down by Wenren He, and so he could only sit back down. Your body was badly damaged by the violent qi of the burning sky drum, Wenren He said lightly. This Venerable One has already cleared it out, and there are some healing elixirs here that you can take on your own. Many thanks to the Venerable One. Yin Hanjiang took the medicine. Turning his senses to his danshan, he found the energy of the burning sky drum completely gone and his wounds healing easily. After circulating qi through his body 36 times, he had completely recovered from his wounds. The only problem was that he had lost some spiritual qi, though he could slowly cultivate it back. After dealing with his injuries, he went looking for Wenren He and found him standing at the cave entrance, watching the waterfall outside. Awake now. Wenren He said. This subordinate is useless, Yin Hanjiang said as he knelt. He hadn't been able to help the Venerable One with his injuries and even force the Venerable One to help him. He was far too incompetent. Wenren He said nothing. He flew out of the cave, with Yin Hanjiang following close behind him. Wenren He had been busy treating his and Yin Hanjiang's injuries for the past few days that he hadn't noticed where exactly they were. He had only sensed the wards he himself had put up and known it was safe. After exiting the cave, he looked around and saw it was indeed the mountains behind the small sect he used to lead and where Yin Hanjiang had grown up. This was where you practiced the sword, Wenren He said, looking at the waterfall. The Venerable One still remembers. Yin Hanjiang said. A full moon happened to be out tonight, bathing the two in gentle moonlight. Yin Hanjiang's face seemed to be shrouded in a silver glow. Wenren He looked away from him and said, this Venerable One remembers. After we conquered Xianyuan sect, I gave this place to you. Have you given this place a name? Yes. Yin Hanjiang walked to the pool before the waterfall and scooped up a handful of water. This subordinate has named this area the Laoyu Pool. Fishing for the moon. Yin Hanjiang's brows softened, as if thinking of a happy memory. With a faint smile, he said, this subordinate used to practice the sword here, until I was too exhausted to move and laid beside the waterfall looking at the sky. Sometimes the moon was curved, and sometimes it was round and reflected in the pool. Back then, I thought you could scoop up the moonlight and fished at the water for it again and again. There was faint amusement in his words. He held his handful of water out to Wenren He. Eventually, when my hands became steady, I managed to fish up the moon. Wenren He looked down and saw the moon reflected in that handful of water which Yin Hanjiang held up with his spiritual energy. He was presenting a tiny image of the moon in his hands. This had been Yin Hanjiang's favorite game in his short, lonely childhood. Wenren He gazed at the Laoyu pool and seemed to see a little child, picking up handfuls of water again and again under the full moon, trying to catch the ever-elusive moonlight. He reached out a hand and kept the water together using his spiritual energy. From his sleeve, he produced a glazed glass vase and poured the water inside. This Venerable One accepts your moonlight. Yin Hanjiang stared dumbfounded as he watched Wenren. He used a treasure vase which could hold an entire river to store his little handful of water, then place it back in his kinkan sleeve. The night wind blew across Yin Hanjiang's face with a faint coolness, and only then did he realize that his face was burning hot and even his ears had turned bright red. Venerable One, this doesn't worth anything, Yin Hanjiang mumbled, bowing his head. Wenren he clasped his hands behind his back. This Venerable One can't remember many old things. I just remember that in my childhood, I grew up in a border town where my father and elder brother were stationed in the military camp all year round, leaving me and my mother behind. She personally taught me to fight with a halberd, but I complained that a halberd was not as elegant and good looking as a sword. My mother told me that length lends power and protection. The weapons on a battlefield doesn't have eyes, and she wanted me to have a better chance of survival, so she wanted me to use the halberd. Before my 16th birthday, I woke with the dawn each morning and studied combat and literature, in order to follow in my father and elder brother's footsteps, who excelled in both military and literary arts, who could protect the town I lived in. But I didn't know how to be a child, how to play and enjoy myself. After I took you in, I only thought about teaching you to cultivate, and not to have fun. Yin Hanjiang opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. He only stared wide-eyed at this completely unknown version of his Venerable One and committed the sight to memory. Thinking about it now, this Venerable One never really had any childish impulses. This handful of moonlight is the childhood that Protector Yin has given to this Venerable One. Wenren he smiled faintly. Since you've given this Venerable One something so precious, I should give you some reward. Is there anything you want? No. Yin Hanjiang wanted to say no need, but seeing Wenren he's slight smile, he felt that he would ruin this rare good mood of the Venerable One should he refused. This subordinate does have a wish, he said quietly. This subordinate has always wanted to go back and visit the border town where he grew up. That's no big deal at all, Wenren he said. Since you want to go, why don't you take this Venerable One on your sword? Then I won't have to wait for you there. Yin Hanjiang called out, chiming. Seeing the patterns that had appeared across the blade, he felt some concern and wanted to ask, but at Wenren he's encouragement, he just mounted the sword and flew off with Wenren he, until they reached the little border town. The sun had risen by the time they arrived. The two hid themselves from sight and landed within the town. What's this? Yin Hanjiang said in shock. The sparsely populated town he remembered had become a fort with walls strong as steel and a bustling marketplace within. The citizens looked prosperous and happy, and merchants peddled their wares enthusiastically from their stalls. The Great Sect War allowed the mortal world to rejuvenate for 10 years, Wenren he said. With abundant spiritual energy, there have been few disasters. Since the plains haven't suffered storms or frost, the nomads have been living well and don't need to plunder bordering towns for grain each winter. Spiritual veins reinforce ley lines, so that more capable officials are born in the capital. They've opened up trade and the commerce has brought prosperity to the residents here. 10 years is more than enough time for a small town to become a fortress. Yin Hanjiang walked to the memorial shrines and found a temple dedicated to a general. He bought incense to offer to the general and bowed to him deeply. Wenren he didn't know what to say. After Yin Hanjiang left, he asked, "This is what you wanted? This Venerable One is right here. Why are you paying respects to my old mortal identity?" Looking at the statue that people had carved for Wenren he, Yin Hanjiang said solemnly, "It's not the same." End chapter. Devil Venerable also wants to know. Chapter 17, Border Town. In the decades that had passed, the temple would have already fallen into ruin if not for the repairs by the local government, as only a few people were still making offerings. Wenren he noticed how practiced Yin Hanjiang's actions were and felt some suspicions. When Yin Hanjiang returned to his side after offering incense and washing the statue, he asked, "Do you come here often?" The base of Yin Hanjiang's ears reddened slightly, but his face didn't change. "If I'm not in seclusion, I come here once a year," he said. Though this was the first time he had come with Wenren, this venerable one doesn't cultivate merits or sustain himself on incense offerings. "I'm right by your side, so why do you need to come bow to a statue of me?" Wenren asked in puzzlement. Yin Hanjiang had followed him from childhood, and Wenren had assumed he understood him well. It was only when he opened abusive love affair, "You are the only one that will remain in my heart," that he discovered he was seeing only the side of Yin Hanjiang that the man deigned to show. Since then, he had observed Yin Hanjiang more closely and discovered many things he'd never noticed before. For instance, this temple was over 80 years old, but the statue still looked like it was new. This must have been at least partially Yin Hanjiang's doing. He would visit every year, yet Wenren had never noticed. Yin Hanjiang was about to answer when a man dressed like a government official approached them. He seemed to be around 50 or 60 years old and came forward to strike up a conversation upon seeing Yin Hanjiang. "Is this young hero named Yin?" Yin Hanjiang didn't treat this old official coldly as he did all others. He cupped his hands respectfully and replied, "I am." The official seemed reminiscent as he looked at Yin Hanjiang's face. He sighed. "I came into management of the memorial shrines when I was 16. Now over 40 years have passed, and fewer people come to pay respects every year. Only the Yin family, from your grandfather up to you today, would visit every year before winter. Yet your father didn't show up for the past 11 years, so I thought your family had also forgotten. My father hasn't been able to walk these past few years and kept lamenting how he could not go. This year, I set out on a trip and my father implored me that I absolutely must come here. He told me that my great-grandfather had been saved by General Wenren 80 years ago, and the future generations of the Yin family should not forget this debt. When I grow old, my son and grandson should also come here." Yin Hanjiang rarely spoke so much and was never good at expressing his thoughts. Wenren saw how well he had played his own father, grandfather, and great-grandfather in front of this official, and would probably play his own son and grandson in the future, which made an unfamiliar feeling rose within him. Those 11 years were hardly because his father's legs didn't work, but that he had been caught up in the Great Sect War and was unable to come. "My father is the same," the old official said. He wiped the stone steel that stood in front of the entrance to the shrine with a damp cloth, so that each name stood out clearly. "He always told me that in that war 80 years ago, if it weren't for General Wenren, this town would have already fallen to the enemy." As his cloth ran over the names, he stared at one that said Zhang Ergu and said with pride, "This one is my grandfather, who died in battle after my father was born. My father said that the peace this town enjoys now was won with the blood of my grandfather and countless other soldiers, and they deserve the highest honors." A chilly wind blew past and the old official wrapped his clothes more tightly around himself. He said with a chuckle to Yin Hanjiang, "You, young people might not mind the cold, but if you don't put on more layers when winter is coming, you'll feel it when you're older." He picked up his washcloth and bucket and slowly walked away from the shrine. After he was gone, Yin Hanjiang turned to Wenren and repeated his earlier words. "It's not the same." Wenren understood this time. Wenren the leader of the demonic sects wasn't the same as the General Wenren that was enshrined in this small border town. The same way that Yin Hanjiang, the left protector of Xianyuan sect, wasn't the same as the young hero Yin who visited the shrines every year. Wenren walked to the memorial stele and brushed his fingertips over the names with a soft smile. "I can actually match each name to a face. Not this venerable one, but just me." At the moment he wasn't the devil Venerable but General Wenren. All the people named on the stele had probably already entered the cycle of reincarnation, maybe even multiple times. But in this small town, they lived on in many people's hearts. Together, these names could be called guardians. The wind in the frontier fortress was strong and the autumn wind was like knives piercing people's cotton-padded clothes. As it picked up, the pedestrians on the road rushed along to the warmth of their homes and the street merchants packed up their wares. In a bit, only Wenren and Yin Hanjiang were left standing out in the streets. The bitter cold wind blew a lock of Yin Hanjiang's hair across his face. Normally, Yin Hanjiang's hair was tied up neatly so not a strand was left loose, so that even though his appearance was youthful, he gave off a far older aura. With a loose lock of hair hanging by his face being blown by the wind, Wenren felt that Yin Hanjiang had gained a shred of youthful innocence. In truth, Yin Hanjiang had always been like this, and it was only that Wenren never really looked at him, and so had never noticed throughout all these years. Wenren smiled slightly. He took out the Abusive Love Affair book from his sleeve and said, "I must be grateful for this book. If not for it, this Venerable One would have overlooked one Yin Hanjiang." Yin Hanjiang's eyes fell on that familiar title again, of the book his Venerable One so inconceivably kept around. Maybe it was because he had shown the Venerable One another side of himself today, or maybe it was because today, the Venerable One seemed different than usual, that Yin Hanjiang thought that the man in front of him was that General Wenren rather than the devil Venerable, so he dared to ask, "Just what mysteries does that book hold?" He remembered that it was after obtaining this book that the Venerable One had left Xianyuan sect and focused his attention particularly on the righteous sect disciple Bailey Qingmiao, looking after her in various ways. The Venerable One only treated Bailey Qingmiao as his junior, so Yin Hanjiang had also unconsciously begun paying closer attention to this besotted young woman, and even become frustrated at her various shortcomings. The Venerable One looked so highly upon her aptitudes and said that they had a karmic relationship, even wanting to take her as disciple. Yet Bailey Qingmiao was only thinking of living happily ever after with He Wenzhou, but with the kind of person He Wenzhou was. Even though Yin Hanjiang rarely had opinions on people besides Wenren, he still couldn't help but acknowledge that He Wenzhou didn't deserve her. Bailey Qingmiao was at least a pure-hearted and kind disciple of the righteous sects, but He Wenzhou was the kind who really left a bad taste in one's mouth. If Yin Hanjiang gave his heart to one person, he would never have considerations toward another. How could he bear to watch He Wenzhou proclaim his love for Bailey Qingmiao while at the same time sleeping with Xu Yanyan? This book tells a romantic story. Wenren started to give a summary of the book but then changed his mind and said instead, "This book led this Venerable One to consider Protector Yin in a new light." Yin Hanjiang was dumbstruck again. "The wind is picking up." Wenren put away the book. "What other secrets does Protector Yin keep in this small town? You might as well tell this Venerable One all at once, now that we have this chance." This subordinate also often goes to restaurants to hear plays and stories, Yin Hanjiang said. "The actors and storytellers have made excessive changes to the stories, but they're still not bad to hear. Why don't you take this Venerable One to one, then?" Wenren said. Yin Hanjiang obediently led Wenren to a restaurant. After the wind started, not many people remained outside, but the inside of the restaurant was crowded. The first floor was already seated full, so Yin Hanjiang requested an expensive room on the second floor. The tea house at the foot of Shangqing Sec's mountain served high-quality teas with spiritual energy, offering delicate pastries and poetry readings. The border town had a completely different atmosphere. The two had barely taken their seats when a waiter brought over a bubbling pot, a large platter of sliced beef, a platter of lamb, a jar of wine and 2 bowls of sheep's milk tea. The cups here were nothing like the delicate teacups in the Henan area, and were wider than their bowls. Without a word, the waiter began pouring 2 big bowls of wine for both. Yin Hanjiang seemed a bit embarrassed at the lack of restraint and was about to ask the waiter to switch for some smaller bowls when he heard Wenren say, "No need for bowls. Isn't wine meant to be drunk straight from the jar?" The waiter said with a clap, "I thought you'd know your stuff. I'll go fetch a jar immediately." Wenren lifted the jar with one hand and took a swig. A trickle of wine ran from the corner of his mouth and vanished before it could drip down, evaporated by the temperature of his skin. Yin Hanjiang had never seen his serious master act so unrestrained and had to swallowed hard. He felt that the wine in the jar smelled richer than before and raised it to gulp down a mouthful. The sting made his eyes water, and he looked at Wenren as if it was somehow his fault. Wenren burst into loud laughter. Ha 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 ha. So, Protector Yin really can't drink alcohol. I can't believe a mouthful of wine can burn a void boundary cultivator so strongly. The Venerable One's alcohol tolerance is just too good, Yin Hanjiang replied. Wenren shook his head. The first time I drank, I gulped it down like my father and brothers and nearly killed myself. I didn't understand why white wine was so strong, and later my mother told me that if a soldier was injured on the battlefield, the strong liquor could save their life. Right up until the extermination of his clan, Wenren had never learned to drink. It was 100 years ago when fought alongside the soldiers defending the border, that was when he learned to drink wine and eat meat unreservedly like the rest of them. Back then, he still had a mortal's body and despite practicing in India, had no problem with eating mortal food once in a while. Right now, on the other hand, Wenren glanced over to the boiling pot and cooked a slice of lamb meat for Yin Hanjiang. He didn't take a bite for himself and only drank and watched the performances. Yin Hanjiang just thought Wenren didn't like meat, so he copied him in drinking wine. Once he got used to the strength of the alcohol, he as a void boundary cultivator naturally didn't need to worry about getting drunk anymore. In the center of the hall was a storyteller, relaying in a thick border accent the story of a bold woman from a small town trying to land a husband. The woman had a blunt attitude, was free in her emotions, and never beat around the bush. The audience loudly approved of her. Listening to the story, Wenren nodded. This is how love ought to be. If this Venerable One were to fall prey to a love tribulation and the other party reciprocated, I would keep that person by my side forever. If they had no interest, then I would let them go. What dignity is there in clinging to someone? He slapped the abusive love affair book down on the tabletop. Whether it was Bailey Qingmiao or Wenren neither had chosen the right path in this story. Yin Hanjiang saw a splash of wine land on the book's cover. Wenren didn't seem to treasure the book very much at all. Under the influence of the wine, Yin Hanjiang showed open curiosity. This is a novel about the romance of Bailey Qingmiao and He Wenzhou. It tells of how Bailey Qingmiao rose to unmatched heights, only to let herself be torn down by He Wenzhou. Wouldn't you agree that it's ridiculous? Wenren felt that he could explain a part of the book's contents to Yin Hanjiang, to keep him from always looking like he was choking on his words. He really worried that this child would suffocate himself someday. Though the latter parts with Wenren's death and Yin Hanjiang's madness could be left out. Back when this Venerable One obtained this book, I just thought it was a story, but after reading it carefully, I found that it divulged the arrangements of heaven. This book records the events of the Great Sect War. It was what allowed this Venerable One to anticipate the plans of the righteous sections. Astonishment showed on Yin Hanjiang's face, but he held back his questions, quietly listening to Wenren. Wenren summarized Bailey Qingmiao and He Wenzhou's relationship in the book, omitting how he also fell in love with Bailey Qingmiao and died. Instead, he provided it as an explanation. This Venerable One was also in the book, and because of a debt to the primordial goddess, I provided help to Bailey Qingmiao many times. That's why I want to take her as a disciple, to lead her to practice the path of indifference and free her from He Wenzhou's influence. I understand now. The doubts in Yin Hanjiang's heart gradually dissipated and were replaced with praise. The Venerable One was indeed far-seeing and could even make use of the plot of a romance novel, taking the Great Sect War as an opportunity to challenge heaven's arrangements. This Venerable One also learned of the location of the snow flame from this book, Wenren said. Additionally, the book mentioned that there was a fated opportunity for you at the Golden Coast Cliffs, which is the shattered mountain meteorite. It is perfectly suited for refining into your sword. The shattered mountain meteorite was really fated to belong to Wenren, but he swapped it around so Yin Hanjiang wouldn't be moved by gratitude and pledge to live and die for him again. Wenren didn't like seeing him like that. Wenren had benefited plenty from the border conflict where he picked up Yin Hanjiang, so there was no need for the man to act so indebted to him. It's convenient for us that both the righteous sects and the demonic sects are currently recuperating from the war. Xianyuan sect should be fine for now, so this Venerable One will accompany you on a trip to the Golden Coast Cliffs, Wenren said casually. Xianyuan sect, should be fine. Yin Hanjiang furrowed his brows. Venerable One, the Xianyuan sect is like a pack of dragons without a head right now. This subordinate fear that if the Venerable One is absent for too long, the Right Protector and the Hall Masters will shift loyalties. It doesn't matter. Wenren took a large gulp of wine. I can just kill them all and save myself some effort. The righteous sects can't pick a fight with us at the moment, so leaving so many high-level demonic cultivators alive doesn't do us anything but invite trouble. The Venerable One have a good point, Yin Hanjiang said respectfully. Wenren raised a finger and tapped him on the forehead. This Venerable One isn't all-knowing or all-powerful, he said in an annoyed tone. There are times when I get things wrong, too. If you follow me blindly in everything, I'll have trouble recognizing my mistakes. You also need to use your brain now and then, and help this Venerable One think. This subordinate understands. Yin Hanjiang rubbed his forehead and smiled slightly. This trip to the border seemed to have brought the two closer. Wenren and Yin Hanjiang no longer adhere in their rigid roles as master and subordinate and had gained a deeper connection. The two had finished 10 jars of wine between themselves, and even the shop's owner was so astonished he came personally to ask their names, so they could be remembered as immortals in the restaurant. Wenren declined to give his name and with Yin Hanjiang behind him, left the world of mortals. He hadn't touched a mouthful from the steaming pot on the table, whereas Yin Hanjiang had eaten quite a bit. After they left the town barely before curfew, Wenren said, Protector Yin, why don't you take this Venerable One on your sword again until we get to the Golden Coast Cliffs? This would stop being useful in a few days. After we get the shattered mountain meteorite, we'll refine your new sword together with it. Chiming rattled a few times, as if objecting to Wenren's words. Yin Hanjiang didn't question him and took Wenren on his sword, heading toward the Golden Coast. His sword flight speed couldn't compare to Wenren's light flash, and the Golden Coast was far enough away that they flew for a whole day and night. By Wenren's assessment, even if Bailey Qingmiao had returned to her sect by now, this wasn't enough time for her to set out and reach the cliffs. The Golden Coast Cliffs were in the far eastern part of the Middle Province. The beaches were covered with fine golden sand, thus it was called the Golden Coast. A high cliff lined the coast, and since golden stone made up the cliff face, it was called the Golden Coast Cliffs. Yin Hanjiang landed at the top of the cliffs, unable to ride his sword past that point. An immortal realm was said to be hidden there, and any place with traces of immortal or divine power would suppress a cultivator's power. The higher level they were, the more they were affected, while a nascent soul or lower cultivator would be unrestricted. Wenren was stronger than an ordinary person even with his cultivation suppressed though, and since he practiced martial arts, his movements were more agile and powerful than most cultivators. Yin Hanjiang was also quite capable, having practiced the sword from his youth. Thus, they climbed the rock face steadily as they descended the cliff. In the book, Bailey Qingmiao fell many times and had to be caught by Wenren only to fall again, for him to catch her again and again. Thinking back, it was odd though. She hadn't fallen once while climbing 9 Cauldrons Mountain while carrying Wenren and yet, she constantly lost her footing once she came to the Golden Coast Cliffs. Was it because the rocks were weathered by the sea spray and had come loose? Yin Hanjiang didn't cause any problems of that sort. His footing was firm and he climbed quickly enough to keep up, no matter how fast Wenren progressed. In the book, they spent a month searching for the spiritual realm, purely because Bailey Qingmiao would twist an ankle once every couple thousand words, or sprain a shoulder, or get all kinds of other injuries, so that they constantly needed to stop and treat her. Wenren he didn't know the exact location of the spiritual realm either. In the book's account, Bailey Qingmiao had been bitten by a poisonous bat and fainted. Wenren he was carrying her, and while she was near death, they discovered the entrance to the spiritual realm. Thinking back, Bailey Qingmiao had found the snow flame at the instant before she froze to death, and the flesh mushroom had appeared before her on its own when she collapsed and fell unconscious. Hold on, was the cause for all these legendary treasures appearing because Bailey Qingmiao was nearing death? After searching for 3 days, Wenren he finally paused. Would the spiritual realm really not appear unless Bailey Qingmiao was there? Wenren he felt a bit troubled. Venerable One. Yin Hanjiang saw Wenren he stopped, hanging onto the cliff face while deep in thought, and hurriedly came to his side. This Venerable seems to have, before Wenren he could finish the sentence, he glimpsed a greenish-black blur out of the corner of his eyes, rushing toward Yin Hanjiang. Instantly, with a wave of a sleeve, one of his arms transformed into a cloud of crimson mist, enveloping the flying shape. In a few seconds, the bat dissolved into blood in Wenren he's hold, falling drop by drop into the ocean below. Venerable One, your arm. Yin Hanjiang saw Wenren he's dissolved arm and spoke with trembling voice. Seems you found out in the end. Wenren he smiled slightly, solidifying his arm again and ruffling Yin Hanjiang's hair. End chapter.